Coming up on this week's show, play Neo Geo arcade games at home.
How to load your Wii U games from a mini disc.
And we catch up with Neil and the crew from RMC.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every Friday with our amazing friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books I'm loving at the moment, Commodore 64, A Visual Compendium. Rediscover the greatest games of Commodore's massive 8-bit machine with this high-quality, full-colour compendium. You can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 368, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And great to be joining us for another trip back to the glory days of retro gaming. Every Friday we jump in our Bill and Ted style phone booth and travel back in time through those bendy tubes. Give me an excellent, Joe.
Excellent. On the spot there. What?
That's what this podcast is about. Classic video games and, of course, bringing you up to speed on everything that's been happening over the last 7 days. Did you like that?
I did. I didn't expect that.
I like the bendy tubes reference.
Yeah. And also an incredible bunch of guests on this week's show. Now, we're going to be chatting to Neil and the team from RMC. Now, obviously, to our audience, Neil, I'm sure, needs no introduction. Always been one of my favourite YouTube channels for, he must be coming on, close to a decade now that he's been on YouTube. And we've had him on the show a few times over the years. I think the last time, and I'm sorry if this brings back any sore memories for you guys, was when he thrashed you on the Christmas quiz.
Did he thrash us? I don't remember.
I just add it to my list of being thrashed. Basically, it's just another one, another notch on my
I think you might
bedpost.
thrash Ravi, actually. Yeah, I can't remember.
I'm 50-50. I either win or get thrashed. Never in the middle.
But we haven't had Neil on for a proper catch-up about kind of what he does since 2018.
Wow.
So that is crazy. I mean, and in the 5 years since we last had him on, I mean, Neil then, he was just running a very popular YouTube channel. I say it like it's nothing, but obviously a big achievement. But since then, he's took the cave, as it is now, into a physical location. Now, of course, he's opened a museum, hasn't he? And this is going really well.
Yeah. The museum's going really, really well for him. And not only has he, built the museum and opened the museum, he's built a crew. There's a team of them now, running the RMC, running the cave. Which is really interesting. So we had the whole gang on, really. It was more like a panel, wasn't it? Which was really cool.
Yeah, so we had Neil on, obviously, behind the YouTube channel, kind of, the idea behind the cave as well. And then we had a guy called Alex on with him as well. Now, Alex is a really interesting guy. He's like a real old school arcade connoisseur, isn't he, Alex?
Yeah, that was really, really interesting story, how he kind of ended up getting into this and how it's, a hobby, a passion, has kind of become a job for him and running an arcade. So they actually have an arcade in the museum now, which Alex runs. And it kind of started out as his kind of like, I don't want to spoil it too much, but of his own collection has slowly now become a museum. But there's some amazing machines he's got in there from the 70s, 80s and 90s and a real kind of history of, arcades. And he's trying to build a museum based on like a lot of British arcades and stuff like that, which is really cool.
It's really interesting because I went and I saw the cave when Neil had just set it up and it just kind of opened. And it was just coming out of that kind of COVID period. And since then, he's done quite a lot. So he's made a retro gaming shop, like a physical store in there. And then there was this space at the bottom that was completely empty. And he really wasn't sure what to do with it. I, of course, suggested a giant computer game rave club. Which he said, no, let's do an arcade. And that was a much better idea. But I'd love to go again because it looks like it's been really successful. And they've done really like smart stuff like leveling the floor and just getting that really like quality stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need to do a Retro Hour road trip down there. And, Neil's invited us down to maybe host an episode of the podcast down there live or something, which would be fun, hopefully this summer. And obviously, they've got all these systems running in there. You need someone who's going to maintain them as well. And that is a big part of what they do. And it actually turns out coincidentally that Richard, who is the landlord of the mill where the cave is located, is also very well versed in electronic repairs. So he's kind of on hand to keep everything going, isn't he?
Yeah, so he actually works for the company that is like based in the mill, and they've been there since like the 70s, I think he said.
Heber, aren't they?
Yeah, he's actually a professional electrical engineer who has a passion, for retro gaming and electronics. So very handy, and it all just kind of fit together really well for Neil. So hearing the story of that and kind of like, what they've been up to the last kind of 5 years and what they've got coming up and stuff, just really, really interesting.
The worst thing you can do is visit an arcade and there's broken machines. It's so frustrating when there's something there and you want to play on it, and it's just
And we take a deep dive into that, kind of like how they maintain them and make sure, children aren't smashing them up and stuff like that, because of, they're hosting all sorts of things there, which, they're really, really building a real, kind of full circle kind of like physical community as well. And like, it's really like kid friendly and stuff like that. And Neil like teaches them like the history of arcades and games and stuff like that. It sounds really fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this one. Neil's always such a good chat, and we're going to be joining him and the crew on the podcast in around half an hour from now. Now, before that, lots of retro gaming stories to update you on, and this week we are joined by, I've got to say, a VIP guest on the podcast this week.
Yes.
Hey, Kat.
That is me. Hello.
Hey, Kat, how you doing?
You caught me off guard there.
Well, this is something that we did mention that we do, every now and then. We're going to invite someone from our patrons community onto the podcast to read the stories with us, give a bit of feedback, and just hang out with us for half an hour while we do the show, actually, which anyone that's been on our patrons hangout before will know what a big part of the hangouts Kat always is. I mean, you're on there pretty much every one, a massive part of our community. So, and you're a big like Neo Geo fan as well. I mean, just kind of give us your background in gaming then. What's kind of your thing that you're into in retro gaming?
Well, I actually started with the VIC-20 was probably like my first computer. I remember having an Atari and an NES. That's pretty much where I started from. It wasn't until I got, more into like a Amiga. So I remember that was probably my first actual computer that I did anything on. I got it under the guise of I could do schoolwork on it because the 2000 looked so much like an IBM machine that my grandfather purchased that for me.
Nice.
But secretly playing micro machines till, 4 a.m. when I'm supposed to do a test. So, or I was supposed to get a presentation together for school. That's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're in good company here, obviously, with the Amiga stuff, Kat. And whenever we see you on the Hangouts as well, you've always got so many cool gadgets and devices and stuff as well. So it is incredible to have you joining us to go through the news stories this week. And actually, we thought we'd start with, because I know you're quite a big Neo Geo fan. And this looks very cool. Now, this is a Kickstarter that is running at the moment for a consoleized Neo Geo that you can play old school arcade games on your TV.
So this is the I'm going to say this wrong now, the Orthros MCS01. So I'm not massive on Neo Geo, but I know enough about it to try and get my way through this. So hopefully Kat can help me on this, with the American side of things with the Neo Geo. But from what I understand, this is a Kickstarter for a Neo Geo console which will play the MVS arcade games. So it's a console that houses a cartridge slot for the big, the arcade Neo Geo cartridges, which, famously you could, take out of the MVS arcade machines, and they didn't work on the normal home console Neo Geo. You could get a converter for them and stuff like that, but I'm not too sure how good they were.
So they weren't domestic then?
They weren't domestic. So the MVS cartridges were to go into the arcade machines, the big red arcade machines. And then you had the normal cartridges, which were big as well, but they went into the normal Neo Geo home console. I think, is it the AES that was called?
And what, the home.
That's brilliant. So what this is the MCS, which is a Kickstarter, which launched about a week ago. There's about 3 weeks left on it as well. And this is a console which houses cartridge slot for the MVS cartridges. And then also it has a motherboard in there, a board in there, which is called, it's a bridge board called the Super Gun Bridge. And that's what is kind of bridging that cartridge to a screen and to, controllers. So you can plug, your Neo Geo controllers into there. So long story short, it's a Neo Geo console, which will play the arcade cartridges, is my understanding of this. I think it looks really cool, perfectly honest. And I think the aesthetic of it, they've captured the Neo Geo really, really well. I've only ever played a Neo Geo once or twice, but from looking at it online, I think it looks really cool.
What do you think of this, Kat, then? Because obviously, you've got a background in Neo Geo stuff.
I mean, it's probably similar to what I have. I mean, mainly it's just a consoleized arcade system. With the Super Gun, one thing I have noticed about this thing, and it's kind of like, I guess it serves a purpose for people who want to get in the Neo Geo, but really don't know anything about, doing like the stereo mods, there's a lot of different things that you have to do to this kind of system to get it to work.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to see, and maybe they're going to shoot for that, because with the Super Gun, I currently have a consoleized Neo Geo that doesn't have a Super Gun, but it plays exclusively Neo Geo. And it also has support for USB controllers and things like that. What I would like to see in something like this is something that also plays the Capcom arcade games, like the CPS-1 and CPS-2 games.
Wasn't there actually a machine that did play them in the 90s and it like flopped massively in Japan? I can't remember what it was called. I know what you mean though, but yeah, it would be really cool to see something like that. That would be really, really cool.
It seems like a decent price as well for what it is, because I can imagine this stuff is like, really expensive to buy these boards and stuff. But the kit itself is $290, which, you get the manual, you get all of the bits with it, and adapters and everything. So I think that's quite reasonable for, considering that these kits and what the hardware you're going to have in there is going to be massively expensive, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I guess the original boards are going to be the pricey part of this, though, aren't they?
Yeah, because the original boards, you got to find the actual boards. Unless they're making a custom board. That's what I would like to actually see. I'd like to actually see, say, something like Analog come out with a Neo Geo that kind of plays MVS carts, plays the CD games, as well as the AVS or the home ports as well. That would be nice. And then I also noticed this system doesn't seem to have, it only has the standard Sega RGB out, or the Sega.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a Mega Drive one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you could get the pound cable and use that. But another thing that I also look at is, depending on what board he has in the system, you may or may not be able to save, because that's
Yeah, it's
some of the boards
saying
don't
there's
allow you to save.
Yeah,
a
that's a good point. I didn't think
HDMI.
of that.
A HDMI out accessory, but I don't know how this kind of works. Would it be like upscaling it, or is it just out of the RGB? And
Unless he's just throwing in the pound cable with it.
maybe,
Yeah, I think it looks like it just comes out the RGB and then it kind of converts it to. It says it's an upscaler on the device, so yeah, I mean, I guess it might put it into 720p or something. I mean, for me, this looks cool because the Neo Geo to me was always something that was so out of reach. And I mentioned before that the only Neo Geo system I've got is the CD console, which because you can burn CDs to it, which I think that's kind of the barrier, though, isn't it? It's the fact that now this hardware is affordable at home, but it's affording the games and tracking them down, I guess. But if you have got a collection of them and, just want to play them in your living room, and maybe your partner's complaining about all the space that your massive collection of arcade machines has taken up with the game.
It's also got a fighting stick, which is compatible with the older stuff as well. So maybe you could even just buy that individually, that fighting stick, and use it on, your Neo Geo CD or your
I
other
would like to see
systems.
2 USB ports as well, though. That would be nice.
That would
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
that
Use a
would,
USB stick if you don't have the big giant sticks or what. Or another thing I would recommend, something like this. This would be a perfect all-in-one kit, though. If you have, say, like the Neo Geo flash carts, the EverDrives for the Neo Geo.
yeah, that would be good.
Just pop it in there, and you never have to change the carts or damage the pins or anything like that.
Yeah,
Now I'm tempted by it.
yeah, that would be really good. I guess, I'm not.
You're adding another
Yeah.
$400.
Yeah, I'm not a Neo Geo collector, but a friend of mine had one about 10 years ago, and I remember trying, at least in the UK, trying to buy just normal, Neo Geo cartridges for the console, for the AES. It was a lot cheaper to buy the MVS games, a hell of a lot cheaper to buy the actual boards and the MVSs than it was to buy the actual commercially released cartridges. So maybe this is meant to be a solution to that, but I don't know. I don't know how it's gone since then. I don't look these things up on eBay. It's too rich for me.
I love the way they work as well. They kind of go into a bracket, then you slide it in the front. It looks a bit like an old VHS tape.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you push it in, which, that's a nice action, as they say. So that is running on Kickstarter right now for another couple of weeks. I think it's easily going to smash it. Only been going a few days, and it's already, at the time of recording, over £17,000 of their £44,000 goal. So if you want to back that, I'll put a link to that. And everything else we talk about, you find it all in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, it does seem recently that the Commodore 64 scene has been producing some very impressive looking new games. We've been talking about quite a few of these over the last few weeks. And this one is something that I've been kind of keeping a bit of an eye on Twitter over the last few months. This is a really impressive looking new parallax shoot 'em up game for the C64 called Zeta Wing 2.
Yeah, this is awesome. It's by a developer that's quite a classic developer that's actually re-emerged and re-got into the C64 scene. Jaguar XJ220 was one of the original designs, and Soulstar as well was programmed by her, and that was a really, really famous game. And this is Sarah Jane Avery. Really, really interesting to see this development, because this is a follow-on from Zeta Wing, which she previously released. And, a lot of these games she's absolutely pumping out, and they are amazing in quality. Like that Brayley Witch Chronicles was another RPG that she did before. But what are you thinking of this? Like, just seeing that parallax, on this kind of demo that she's sharing and work in progress. Look, it looks very, very impressive for me.
I mean, I've always been a fan of Commodore 64 games. I mean, there wasn't many shoot 'em ups I can remember playing on our C64, because my brother had one in the late 80s, early 90s. I remember Uridium. We used to love that. That's more of a side-on scrolling shooter. This is more a traditional kind of bottom-of-the-screen shoot-up game. But, I mean, it looks very advanced as well. I mean, you mentioned that parallax scrolling that looks butter smooth from the previews that she shared on Twitter. And apparently there's like weapon upgrades in here as well. There's end-of-stage bosses that are thrown in the game too. You've got one thing that's really good is, because obviously the Commodore 64, you're playing that, you've got to have a pumping SID soundtrack.
Oh, of course.
And this has got that, and it's got sound effects over the top of it as well. It's PAL and NTSC compatible, and apparently it's going to be published through Bitmapsoft.
Oh, nice.
So there's no kind of estimated release date on this yet, but I've got to say, I mean, out of any Commodore 64 game I've seen, some people have kind of complained a bit that the colours are a little bit oversaturated, but I think to me that kind of adds to the charm of it. I really like the way this looks.
I agree with that. I really think it adds to the charm, and I write C64 and stuff like that off in my head because of it's before my time. But I think this looks really fantastic. And as you say, I think one of the big selling points is the parallax scrolling in there. I think people are going to hate me for saying this, but it looks like a really nice Mega Drive game or a NES game.
Yeah, or a NES game.
Yeah. I think it looks fantastic.
It looks like a high standard console kind of title. I love these kind of games. Having something that's not going to lag with so many sprites on the screen or no slowdown, and just that consistency is really important when you're playing something like this.
Commodore 64 is a weird one for me because I actually didn't really grow up with it, which people are surprised because I was around. I always thought the Commodore 64, I didn't see it being much better than the VIC-20. I mean, as a kid, I didn't know the difference. I mean, if you walked into a store at the time and looked at a Commodore next to a VIC-20, they looked exactly the same.
Yeah. Same case.
Yeah, I mean, there were so many other systems on the shelf at the computer store at the time. I mean, you had like your Atari ST, you had all the different consoles. But I don't know, getting into the Commodore, it's funny. I wanted to get into the Commodore 64 a little bit more. Do currently have one, but I ended up buying the C64 mini console. So if this was something that I could get in ROM form.
I bet you'll be able to.
Yeah, and I'd probably give it a shot, see what it's like. But C64 hasn't really been known for shooters, as far as from my memories. I mean, I remember playing games like Impossible Mission and the voice, the voices from that game. Stay a while.
That's the thing. I know there was some on the Commodore 64, like Delta and Armor Light, that were quite well known. Even like, stuff like Whizball, I guess you could kind of call a bit of a shoot-'em-up game maybe. But yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, Kat. It's not really the first genre that springs to mind that, is really excels on the Commodore 64 to me. But I think looking at this, I think maybe we kind of underrated it a little bit, because it does look like it is definitely capable of delivering a good shoot-'em-up game. And I think, just now it seems like, we're talking about this so much that there's just these really polished games that are coming out on these systems that are really showing some untapped potential. So we haven't got a release date on this yet, but definitely something that we'll be keeping an eye on. I've actually reached out to Sarah to try and get her on the podcast as well. So
Sarah,
fingers crossed.
We'd love to have you on.
Yeah, definitely. We'd love to hear more about this. So if you want to check out the work in progress, she's doing regular posts on Twitter. So I'll link up her Twitter feed in our show notes as well. Now, this is something that I think will tick all of your retro boxes, Ravi. You're our resident Wii U fan. And whenever I see you walking around, I mean, you don't have Spotify on your iPhone. You're always hooked up to a mini disc player.
This is the kind of two technologies that I love, like coming together to create something mental. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of mini disc. Absolutely love that format, and the Wii U, and playing with the Wii U and kind of experimenting with it. Now, you sent me this video, and this is absolutely insane. I wasn't quite sure how this works. Now, with the Wii U, what you can do is you can put an external hard drive in there. For some reason, they're using a mini disc player, right? And they're using that as the external hard drive for the Wii U. And I always thought this has to be a data disc, or this has to be one of the later discs. Like, they had I think it was HD mini disc later on, which
after the NetMD stuff came out.
Yeah, which were 1 gigabyte. And also NetMD must be the way that they're connecting to this, because it's via USB as well. But then every time I've tried to connect to NetMD on one of my older devices or on a Windows machine, it's been an absolute nightmare. Like, you've had to use the old version, or there's now like web-based interfaces on it and stuff. So I'm really wondering how this works, because this is just a simple video. They've got the mini disc, they've connected it up with USB, must be through NetMD. Then somehow they're just using an audio mini disc, which amazes me, really. I was talking about this with Kat earlier, and she was saying that, it's a bit about the size of a CD in information size. And
this is it's a YouTuber called Will It Work who's made this video, and you're right, it is. It's one of the later mini disc players. So it's NetMD. That was the standard they released. It was basically you could connect it up to a PC.
Yeah, you could blast like MP3s onto there. So you could compress them down and then blast them. And it was kind of meant to be that stopgap between MP3 players and mini disc.
Yeah, because that's when I got into, I got a mini disc player, I think about 98, 99, that I had for a couple of years before I got my my Diamond Rio player and then my iPod. But yeah, what he's done in this video, it is quite simple. Like you said, he's just using it basically as a hard disk. So, but I wasn't aware of this as well, because you're right, there was data mini discs that came out later on. They could hold about 1 gigabyte, but apparently you can just use standard mini disc audio discs,
which is
as
mad.
Data discs on this device. Now, they don't hold a lot of information. I think he mentions that the lowest capacity mini discs hold around maybe 30 megabytes, and then what he uses here is a 60-minute mini disc that basically puts in here, links it up via a USB cable to the Wii U, formats it as an external hard disk, and then it's 202 megabytes.
That's it, though.
That he's got
That's
available.
all. There's no special drivers. There's nothing. It's just putting it in there. It recognizes it as a storage device and then formats it. It's mental. Absolutely
now,
mad.
obviously, 200 megabytes isn't a lot of data for a recent-ish console, but there are some the kind of indie games on there, and there are some smaller retro games.
There's the Wii U store as well, so you can actually get the eShop. Images off the old Wii shop and then put them on it as well. So you might be able to run some titles on there.
Yeah, well, he actually copies over Metroid Fusion, which the GBA game. He copies that over, which does fit onto the mini disc. So he actually successfully launches it. It launches a little bit slow, but after that, it plays fine. So, the eShop on the Wii U apparently closes down this month.
Oh, yeah. There's already a backup of it. But, the one thing I'd love is to do this myself and hear the sound of the mini disc accessing as you play a level, like, voot, voot, voot. That would be really cool.
Kat did mention before that it might be cool to kind of have an internal mini disc player on the Wii U. I'm looking at my Wii U now, and you've got that kind of flap on the front, that you open up, and it's got the card reader and stuff in there. Yeah. You could probably fit a mini disc player in there.
Well, if you cut it out and then pushed it back, maybe, or did some hacks. Yeah, that's the next thing, isn't it? Having your mini disc drive, so you put the CD in the top and then the mini disc in the bottom. Oh, lovely.
I would have loved to have a mini disc back in the days, but kind of now, I think it's more of a kind of like a way back era. But honestly, if using a mini disc on a Wii U, if it was on there, say if it was in the system, that would be awesome. But I would honestly love to see if you could run actual, that's what I mistook on here, actual Wii U games on there, but I know that the size is just not big enough to run those games.
It's interesting because like mini disc nowadays, it's a bit of a task, you know. Even when I am transferring stuff, it's not nice. Like I have to go through the mini disc with a cotton bud and find like little bits of dust and take them off and stuff. It's a bit of a nightmare.
What's the maximum size on a mini disc?
1 gig for the bigger ones, but they're very expensive. You know, the disc could probably be like 20 or 40 pounds even. For the 1 gigabyte ones, and you need the expensive players as well. Like this high MD player that he's got is probably, going into the 400.
I'd love to see this as a substitute for like the Sega CD or some of the older CD consoles like the 3DO. I would love to see something like that.
I'd love to just give it to a kid nowadays and go, "What's this?" and just watch them like go, "What?" You know?
That's me.
They always look very cool, mini discs, didn't they? It's like, and I think they're quite rugged too.
Yeah.
Compared to CDs and cassette tapes, I always found that, you could drop a mini disc down the stairs and it'd generally survive. But I think, if you've got a Wii U and you want to back up all your e-store purchases, probably not the best method to do it, but it is very cool that you can do that. And it seems like the Wii U is actually very flexible in terms of USB devices, because he's actually got some other videos on his channel where one of them uses an iOmega zip drive to launch the same game.
I've got to get a floppy drive hooked up to that next and see if that will format.
So we always love seeing kind of obscure media or obsolete media being used in weird ways. So I'll link that video up in our show notes as well. Now it seems that Dungeon Crawler is the word of the month on this podcast at the moment. We've got another one this month, Joe.
Rogue games. No, this one isn't a rogue game. This is a dungeon crawler. Right, so this is called Hibernaculum. Hibernaculum? Want to give that a bash, Dan?
That sounds about right. Yeah,
Does that sound about right?
Hibernaculum?
Hibernaculum.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go. Hibernaculum. That sounds a lot better. So this is Hibernaculum, a survival horror RPG, which is also launched on Kickstarter with about 3 weeks left on it. I really love the aesthetic of this, but this is, like you say, it's a dungeon crawler, which is very much in the vein of classics like Eye of the Beholder, that first person style. But what makes this is quite unique is it's a dungeon crawler, but it's also survival horror. And the aesthetic of it is it's very reminiscent of Alien, like Ridley Scott's Alien.
Yeah, it's got that. I can never say it. HR Giga.
HR Giga.
And did you ever see a game called Dreamweb on the Amiga?
Yes.
The interface feels like very Dreamwebby to me.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one, but yeah, I really like the look of it. It looks quite scary and quite immersive, even though it's a retro style game. It is going to be coming to Switch as well as Steam and PC and Mac, and it's going to be brought to us by a guy named Victor Flug, I believe it is. Who's done a few games which look quite similar to this. Strangeland, Primordia, very, very kind of similar looking games from looking, looking up his back catalogue. I do like the look of it, just quite scary. Like I say, very gory.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of the aesthetics, it's got cutscenes and stuff in there as well.
Yeah.
Which, they look really nice as well. Because I think a lot of these kind of games back in the day didn't have that element.
No, I'm not massively familiar with these games, these kind of games. And going back and look at some of them, they do look, I don't want to say basic, but they're of the time. But obviously, this is quite modernized with a lot of like you say, a lot more. Not just you don't have to use your imagination with some of the story, but it is obviously story driven. But a unique selling point of it is apparently is you can play the game kind of like how you want to play it. You can play it very slow and steady wins the race, or you can kind of go in guns a-blazing, and you will get different.
Like I always do, then die instantly.
Yeah. But obviously you can, there's a replay value there of your story can go very different, or the kind of the way the game goes is very different. But yeah, very, very late 80s, early 90s inspired, which, right up my street.
It's like a Danzig album from the early
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very Misfits, actually, isn't it? Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily, but I mean, the H.R. Giger inspired art of the first couple Danzig albums is definitely reminiscent of this.
You know, I think this artwork is just stunning. I want to know who the pixel artist for it was. Like, this is really, really well done. And yeah, they're using all the kind of modern stuff that you can use.
The guy who's making it, Victor Flug, he's the pixel artist for it as well.
Oh, wow.
So he's Swedish, and he's a developer, pixel artist, and a creative director of the game, and he's founder of Wormwood Studios, who I have heard of.
And he's made all the music using synthesizers, but also circuit bent synthesizers, which is just totally wicked. And he's got a list of the synths that he's actually used for it. So I can imagine the soundtrack is just going to be nuts, like really good synthy atmospheric stuff.
Yeah, so it looks really good, actually. And I think, again, this does seem to be a genre that's kind of having a bit of a comeback recently. And obviously, it's very popular. So this is something that's running on Kickstarter, already smashed its goal in just a week of being on there, over £42,000 at the time we're recording this, and still over 20 days left on it. So if you want to get involved in that, I'll put a link to that in our show notes as well. Now, before we get into our special guest this week, chatting to Neil and the crew from RMC, just a quick reminder that we do have a little Patreon that we do just occasionally mention, because that's the reason that we can keep bringing this podcast to you each and every Friday, and any support we get on there is massively appreciated. And I think, Kat, you're very well placed to say how much fun the Hangouts are as well. I mean, we've got a real great community there, haven't we?
The thing I like about the Hangouts is somebody like myself actually fits in there as well. I mean, we have a lot of the guests that you have on too are just as diverse as people like myself. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different people on there, and getting on camera and presenting the way I like to present, and nobody really it doesn't feel like anybody has any animosity towards me or anything like that. So yeah, I try to get on there as much as I can, like every weekend, just to kind of be there, like, people like us exist. We're not unapproachable,
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's like we love all our community. Everyone is welcome. We've got a great group, all kinds of people from all around the world as well. And we all just come together once a month on a Sunday for a couple of hours, show our collections off, show what we've been picking up, talking about all sorts of things, retro games, of course, movies, music, it all kind of pops up. So it's great to have you part of the community, Kat, and everyone is welcome. So if you'd like to join us on Patreon, obviously get invited to the monthly Hangouts. And also we do a little bonus podcast as well, don't we, Joe? Just for our secret VIP patrons.
Secret VIP patrons. Yeah, we do the After Hours podcast. I think we're about 31, 32 episodes into that now, which we release every month. We do record that on the last Sunday of every month, so then it comes out about a day or two later. Our most recent one was Top 5 Hidden Gems, where we covered quite a broad kind of like aspect of different systems. Like, I mainly focused on Nintendo, the original NES and the PS2. Ravi spoke a lot about a lot of PC games, and then Dan...
And Flash internet games as well.
Flash games. And then Dan covered a lot of Amiga games. Some of them Ravi hadn't heard of. So real kind of like hidden gems. So that was a really, really fun one.
It was good because actually, I think we chose 5 games each. And I think there's only like one game that we all kind of knew, wasn't there? It wasn't like most of us didn't know each other's games.
Yeah, it was about one or two games I think I'd heard of on each of yours lists, like combined. So it was really interesting.
Yes, if you want a few suggestions of games that we love that you may not be too familiar with, definitely worth checking out the latest episode of the After Hours podcast. And you get the normal podcast ad-free. I try and get it out early if I can as well. You get extra patrons news every week as well. But really the main reason that you're joining us on Patreon is just to support the show and make sure that we bring it to you each and every Friday. And if you'd like to join our wonderful patrons community, all the details are at theretrohour.com. And when we get a patron on the show as well to join us for the news, we like to invite them to bring a story to the mix too. And Kat spotted something really interesting. Tell us about Analog's new TurboGrafx system.
Oh, yeah, the Duo, the Analog Duo. I was looking at that, and that it kind of seems like they've been waiting a long time to release it, but it's supposed to be released this year sometime. And it's kind of the same thing as like the Mega SG, I know they did a Nintendo system, and I know they also did the Analog Pocket, but this one, and I've never seen something like this before. This is one that actually does both the TurboGrafx, the PC Engine CDs. It does the Super Graphics, and as well as it does, of course, the Hue cards. I've never seen one that like kind of puts everything into kind of one little complete package with HDMI as well as SD card support. So, I mean, it's definitely something I was looking at.
I know you recently picked up an Analog Pocket as well. So you kind of know their products. So what do you think of
not
the
the Analog
quality?
Pocket.
Oh, I know you were after one.
I was after the Pocket. I was after the Pocket because I saw that it also can play TurboGrafx. But this one, I have the Mega SG. So
okay,
judging by that system, I mean, everything that they build is very well built. As far as FPGA consoles, pretty much no noticeable lag on these consoles. They're definitely going to be a little bit more expensive. Usually, this one's probably going to be around, say, the $200-$300 mark. But if you're getting into especially TurboGrafx 16 and stuff like that, I mean, it could get very, very pricey. And then plus, this one, I really like about this one as well. It comes with the Bluetooth console as well, so you have like the Bluetooth, the Bluetooth controller as well. Just like their old systems, they always throw in those 8-bit DOE controllers, and those things are very solid as well.
Yeah, because I do remember us talking about this when it got announced. I mean, God, it must be like 2-3 years ago now when they initially announced this, but I imagine, like everything else in the world, it's been the component shortage, I imagine, that slowed things down. But there are saying there are going to be some limited quantities, hopefully coming out this summer. I love the look of it as well. I mean, I think I mentioned this when we first talked about it. It looks a bit like the, the consoleized version of the CDI.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that, actually, the look of it, which, there's not many of us out there, but being a CDI fan, I'm actually quite pleased about that. But again, in TurboGrafx 16, PC Engine, not really a platform that I'm all that familiar with because, it wasn't ever all that big over here.
And I think it also is good because a lot of this knocks those need for having an external upscaler on there. It comes out straight in 1080p and at high quality as well, which is really interesting because, back in the days, people were buying all these upscalers and stuff. But if you get a system like that, it's all kind of built in. So it does seem like it's worth the money, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's made with FPGA as well. I mean, we talk in the interview coming up with Neil in just a moment as well. We kind of mentioned that, the difference between FPGAs and kind of software emulation and how you can just tell. And I imagine, there has been a worldwide shortage of FPGAs, which I imagine might be the reason.
I think we're kind of coming out of the shortage at the moment. I've started to see a lot more stock of stuff in places and more products.
Yeah, that's probably why it was pushed the way it was. Because I remember, it was in 2020 that it was announced. And then, shortly after that announcement, that's when a lot of the stuff started hitting. Let's just say something hit the fan. Yeah. And then it was like pushed off to the back. Yeah, seeing this now in 2023, though, I'm glad they got two different colors. You got a white one or a black one. I kind of want to get the white one now.
Only if it yellows. That's the thing. It needs to have something to yellow the console in there.
I always buy black systems now just because I always scuff them or anything that's like, white or something, I always end up getting dirty. So, yeah, I mean, they both look really nice.
Yeah, and it looks like you can back up your games to the SD card, or if you have other means of getting games on the system that we can't advertise, but you're open to do that as well.
Other methods are available. So yeah, that does look very cool. So it's already this episode. Then I'm getting to TurboGrafx and the Neo Geo now, by the sounds of it as well. So an expensive episode for me, this one, but they do look really, really cool. So if you want to check that out, and all the stories, of course, you don't have to Google around for them or anything like that. Just check the description on your podcast app or head to our website at theretrohour.com. Now, just before we hop into our chat with Neil and the crew from RMC, just a moment to give a quick mention to this episode's sponsor, and it is a very loyal supporter of the Retro Hour, our wonderful friends at ExpressVPN. Now, I don't know about you guys, how many different streaming services do you subscribe to? I think in our house we've got the missus signed up to Disney Plus. She's got a thing called Star Play. I don't even know what she watches on there.
Now TV.
We've got Netflix.
I keep seeing stuff that like HBO Max.
Prime.
There's like Peacock as well. All this stuff I don't understand. Shudder. I've never heard of Shudder.
Do you remember though, a few years ago it'd be like, we'll cut cable off. It'll be cheaper just to get a few streaming services. Now I think I pay double what I used to play in cable on streaming. But the thing is, I mean, you pay for these services like Netflix and they hide thousands of shows and movies from you just based on your location. And they recently had the nerve to increase their prices again. So the thing is, we reckon you should get value for your subscriptions to these services, and you can get your full money's worth by using ExpressVPN. Now, no, Ravi, you actually use ExpressVPN to watch Netflix libraries from all around the world, including you always find something on the American Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
That we haven't got over here.
Yeah, I love it. And, the thing is, it's really fast as well, because I've used other previous VPNs and they just don't have the speed that ExpressVPN has. It's just absolutely no buffer, HD quality. It's great. Some of the stuff I've been checking out that's not available on the UK one is Kid and Play House Party, which is one of the classics. Tenacious D as well. The Pick of Destiny, which I'm going to try and do a Bob Doopy Dup. No, I won't do that. And Team America World Police as well, which is just a work of art.
That's the thing. I mean, if you've kind of rinsed all of your local libraries, there are actually over 90 different Netflix libraries around the world. So if you want something to watch, all you've got to do is, it's dead easy, isn't it? Just to switch to a new country.
Yeah.
Literally the click of a button and you're there. So you can change your location to anywhere in the world and watch their local Netflix library as well. And also it works with more than just Netflix, BBC iPlayer that, we've only got here in the UK if you want to check that out. Super fast as well. You can use it on your phone, your laptop, even there's, apps for your smart TV, and you can watch them on your big screen with zero buffering. So stop paying full price for streaming services and only getting access to a fraction of their content. Get your money's worth by heading to expressvpn.com/retro. Use our exclusive link and you will get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free on top of a 1-year plan. That's expressvpn.com/retro, and a big thank you to our friends at ExpressVPN for their continued support of our show. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week, Kat. It's been an absolute blast to have you on, joining us for the news, and we'll see you on the Patrons Hangout in a couple of weeks, hopefully.
Yeah, at the end of the month. I'm always on there if I can.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. It's been wonderful having you to share the news with us this week, and stay here. On the way, we're going to be catching up with Neil and the crew from RMC. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the main event when we welcome on this week's very special guest. And actually, it's not one guest this week. We've actually got 3 guests, and we're going to talk about maintaining arcades, building a physical space that people can come and experience retro computers in, and have a bit of a catch-up with our good friend Neil as well, because it is pretty shocking, Neil, that I don't think you've been on for a proper chat, apart from the Christmas quiz, that we won't talk about when Joe's on the podcast, because I know it's a bit of a sore subject when he thrashed him a couple of years ago.
It still stings.
But it has been about 5 years since we last had a catch-up, Neil, so it's nice to have you back.
Thank you for having me back on. And I must say, I feel a lot more relaxed coming on this time than I did all those years ago. I've a bit more practiced, I hope.
Well, obviously you do your own podcast, This Week in Retro, so you're well-versed in podcasting these days. And I was a guest on there a couple of months ago as well. So it's nice to be able to return the favour and get you on as well, Neil.
Indeed.
And
yep.
Also you're joined by Alex as well, who maintains your arcade archive. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on. Pleasure to be here.
And Richard, your landlord as well. So hopefully on best behaviour as well today, Neil.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Richard. We're going to be talking to you about obviously maintaining the equipment and helping Neil build this incredible space as well. Let's talk about that first, Neil, because since we last had you on, the biggest thing, which I'm sure anyone that's watched your channel, listened to your podcast will know, that now you've grown the cave from a YouTube channel to a physical space. So tell us a bit about kind of where the idea came from and how that journey's been.
Yeah, I think it's probably a secret desire of anyone who collects retro to have a retro museum to show off all of their kit. Who doesn't want to do that? And it was always one of mine, but I never really thought it would be a reality. But there was a series of events that happened, some fortunate, some less fortunate, the less fortunate being the pandemic that came along. And when I last spoke to you, I was renting a small office space, which I called The Cave. That was Cave 3.0 at the time, from which I made the YouTube videos. And then when the pandemic happened, my landlord there at the time decided that actually it might be better to use that space for residential properties rather than office properties, because that just looked like the way things were going with the whole movement to work from home and such. So planning permission went in. It looked like I was going to lose my office, and I put a plea out on YouTube to say, this is what's happening. What do I do, guys? And it was at that point that I got an email from a chap who I'd never heard of before, called Richard, saying we might have the space for you. And things just kind of snowballed from there. I think initially Richard thought I might just want a small space, like for like, to carry on doing what I was doing. But as soon as I saw what he had to offer, some bolder ambitions bubbled up, and it kind of snowballed from there. Yeah.
So what have been your biggest challenges you faced so far with it, like with the operations of it and setting it up?
The stairs.
Oh, brilliant.
It's on the 3rd floor, and anyone who's been there will see how much stuff is up there. I mean, the arcade machines in particular, thank goodness Alex came along and opened an arcade on the ground floor, because at one point I was looking to get more arcades up there. And wow, it takes several days to recover with each arcade that you take up those stairs. So the stairs, other than that, the things that you would expect, for example, getting together a team of volunteers to help with the day-to-day running, the back end things like the ticketing system. No matter how many off-the-shelf ticketing systems you try, you can never quite hammer it to fit exactly how you want it to. So we have actually just finished creating a bespoke ticketing system that does everything we want and reports on everything that we want. So that was a big hurdle that we got over. And the constant marketing. You can, if you're thinking of opening a museum, I never knew how much you would need to market this thing to get people through the door. It's constant. You've got to keep reminding people. So there are all these facets and all these skills that I've never had to try and work out before, which I'm figuring out as I go. But that's always been the way with the cave. It's always been a case of feeling it out as I go. And just being careful not to take on, too much risk, just letting things evolve naturally. And here we are, almost a year to the day since we opened the doors to the public with the cave as a museum. It's fantastic.
Oh, wow. Do you get a bit of an odd question, but do you get many donations? Do many people come in and say, I found this, would this be any use of you or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, about 90% of what's in the cave is donated.
Oh, brilliant.
And just today, I'm editing a donations episode because a chap contacted me and said, I'm 20 minutes away in Swindon. I might have some things you want. So I went over there. I've got an estate car, which I think can carry quite a lot. I only just squeezed it all in there. And this video is going to come out next week. So I'll tell you some of the things that are in there. Dan, you'll like this. An Amiga 4000 with a Cybervision 64 card and a GVP T-Rex accelerator.
Wow. I'm just wiping my table from all the drool that suddenly...
And the battery had been removed, so no leak. The only drawback on that one is that it's spray painted black and red. It looks a bit like the A-Team van, but, I'm not complaining.
Interesting.
There's Auric 1s, there's Acorn Archimedes A3010s, there's Dragon 32. There's just everything you can think of, and they're all boxed like new. Like they are in mint condition. And this is kind of an example of some of the very serendipitous events that happen around the cave. Just a week ago, I was saying to people, I'd like to create a new area of the cave, which is like a systems library where you can see all the systems on a shelf that aren't in our hands-on area, something a bit rarer like a Sam Coupe perhaps. And so I've always wanted to try that. A volunteer can take it off the shelf and set it up. But I'm going to need some good systems to make that happen. And then lo and behold, a week later, this kind of donation turns up. It's just... one of many examples of what's made the cave possible through the generosity of others and just these really fortunate series of events. One of them being Richard reaching out and contacting me in the first place. So, yeah, look out for that one soon.
Fantastic.
The timing of it as well, because I remember watching your initial videos when you and Richard were kind of at the early stages of building it as well. I mean, that was like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was kind of between COVID lockdowns, wasn't it? So,
yeah. So we did do the building during lockdown, which presented some interesting problems. For example, a lot of our tables are made of scaffold and big scaffold board, and halfway through lockdown, the price of wood nearly doubled. So we had to deal with some interesting things like that. Then we had our soft launch, November 2021, when we came out of lockdown. And then not long after we'd done our soft launch and we were ready to open fully to the public, we got locked down again. So yeah, we did have to tackle that. But thankfully, because of the way this museum operates, we have the YouTube revenue, we have the museum revenue. We're not entirely dependent on ticket sales. So we could do the right thing and sit back and wait until it was good and safe and proper to open again. It wasn't too painful, so that was good.
You only had that opening weekend, that first invite-only event. I mean, that must have been such a buzz when people were coming through the door. And what are your memories from that then? Was it like pure nerves before it opened?
A lot of nerves. Just hoping that people would enjoy it and use the space, because we'd kind of figured out how we wanted the space to work. But until you've got people in there, you don't know how they're going to flow around the space and how they're going to use things. So it was nice to see that it kind of panned out how we had planned and expected it to. But yeah, my favorite part was just standing by the door and watching people's reactions as they came in. And Richard's seen this himself as well, and Alex now. That doesn't change. Week on week, I will just stand by the door and watch people come in and watch their faces light up and watch them spot things and just grin from ear to ear. That is probably the best part of the whole thing.
So you've had some amazing guests there in person as well, some fantastic videos, and on your podcast as well in person and stuff. Are live events something you want to focus on more? Any events that you've got coming up, that you want to chat about?
Yep. Yeah. So we've got the space. The goal now is to use the space as much as possible. It is primarily a YouTube studio in the week, and it will continue to be so, because we don't want people who can't actually make the trip to the cave to feel excluded. We want to share with them everything that happens in it.
Yeah.
So when we have special guest speakers, I record them and upload them. Just last week, we had a talk from Hoffman from the demo scene.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever had Hoffman on your show? I can't remember.
Yeah, a while ago. Yeah, he's always a really interesting guy.
Yeah, so he did a great talk, which we got recorded. We've had Stu Cambridge in. We've had the Oliver twins in. We've got Simon Phipps booked, who is behind. You've had him on as well, I think, from Rick Dangerous. We've got David Rowe, who is an artist on books and magazines, did covers on CMVG, Sinclair User, things like that. Nightmare, he did some backgrounds on the TV show Nightmare. So we're getting all these guests booked in. On top of that, I'm also doing things like kids half-term events where I do a talk on the history of video games, which incorporates all of the exhibits, because it's got to be very hands-on and engaging for the kids to keep them interested. So we have 3 talks interspersed with little missions for them to go and play on all the old systems and report back. And a big part of that is I tell them they're going into a time machine back to the 80s, to a real arcade. And that's when they go down and meet Alex and get to play on all the arcade games down there. And
I'm in my mid-30s and I want to go do that.
Oh, yeah, come in my time machine, Joe. So, we're figuring it out, and we're just putting together now a kids coding club for the summer holidays. So it's just a case of working out the best way to use this space while not excluding, my YouTube audience, because they are... 150,000 people is still my primary audience, not the 30 at a time I can get through the door. So I want to keep everyone happy while enabling people to come and actually enjoy the cave firsthand. Yeah.
No, that sounds fantastic. It's funny because it's like, it's as if it's come full circle, because, you go back maybe 15, 20 years when YouTube was starting out, and this was all, kind of YouTube and online podcasts and everything was all becoming quite big. And you go from that physical culture and community to an online community, and it's as if you've come full circle with it, if that makes sense. You've gone from being an online entity with an online community, and it sounds like you're doing a really good job of them making that a physical community as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we have a monthly patron day, and that is really, every week it feels like a community is coming together. But on those days in particular, we're getting the same guys coming back month on month. And some of the projects that they turn up with, because they're keen to show the things that they've been working on and upgrading. And Holly, for example, who came to our last patron day, she's over again this Friday. Hang on, I better check. Richard, are we allowed to talk about this yet?
Yeah, I had it on my notes to talk about it.
Okay,
so feel free.
Okay. So
check with the boss.
So Holly's developed a laser-based system that you can plug MAME into, and it will take the information from MAME and do vector games using lasers. So we can do a game of Star Wars, Atari Star Wars, on the side of the mill, the full size of the mill, using lasers.
Oh, wow.
And then longer term, the goal is to shrink that down so that we can actually fit it into arcade machines. So in an example like Tempest or Star Wars, when the monitors break, Richard will be able to talk in a lot more detail about this, but when the monitors break, apparently they're very difficult to fix, or the parts are very difficult to get hold of. So if we can create a laser-based replacement for Vector arcades, or even something like the Vectrex, then we can keep these things going for even longer for people to enjoy. So that is just this amazing thing that's happened because the community's come together and Holly wants to share it with us. And then we've said, well, here are different ways that we can use this technology to help you develop it even further. And just great things happen from people coming together, and the cave is a space where people can do that.
And play video games on the side of a building. That
games.
sounds pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, but you'd be surprised. Often it will take an hour before anyone plays a game because they're so keen to chat and catch up in the cave, and then things settle into a bit of gaming. Yeah.
You know, I find it interesting you mentioned about having the kids classes in as well. Because, I mean, how do they kind of react to it? Because it makes me feel really old when my little 9-year-old nephew, he talks about the 90s as, he calls it the 1900s, the last decade.
He's not wrong,
What was
though.
it like in the 1900s? I know, and I'm like, what? It sounds like it was like 100 years ago. But, I mean, to them, do they kind of... How do they connect? Kind of obviously, you know, they're on the smartphones, Nintendo Switches now. Do they kind of connect that back to like the BBC Micro and stuff? Do they see that link, or how do they kind of react to these old machines?
As part of the talk, I asked them what they thought was the first ever video game, and one of them said Minecraft. So that made me feel pretty old. But the things I try to use to hook them in are, of course, the Sonic and the Mario games and all of the familiar characters. We can take them down to Donkey Kong and show them, you know, Mario all the way back in, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, 1982, was it?
Donkey Kong?
Yeah.
81.
81, there we go. That's why Alex is here. 1981. And then just kind of weave together a story using familiar faces for them. But they were very engaged, to be honest. They were there to learn, and they were keen to learn. So no, we didn't have much problem engaging the kids, to be honest.
So, Richard, what's your background with electronics and just your background in general, and, you know, the story of kind of like reaching out to Neil?
Well, my background is within the electronics, so I'm an electronics engineer,
Cool.
trained, and I've done electronics design and manufacturing for the last 30 years. Been lucky enough to work at Heber, which is the electronics company that occupies the mill. And over the last 25, 30 years or so, we've been slowly doing up the mill from each floor to get everything nice. And we had quite a lot of space. And where Neil's previous landlord decided that he was going to sell up during the pandemic, we decided the exact opposite. We decided, well, wouldn't it be a good idea to get more people, like-minded engineers, complementary companies into the mill? So we actually sort of were actively looking that summer while we were in lockdown and at home and sort of wondering what to do. And it was, Sunday afternoon when I usually watch Neil's channel. I've been watching him since the start. And he put this plea out, and I sent him a message within minutes of seeing his plea for somewhere to go. And I never really thought he would necessarily want to come here, because I thought he was set on having somewhere in Swindon. But it was a good idea, and he popped over and had a look. And I did actually show, I think, the downstairs floor. I think that was it. It felt more like a cave.
Yeah, you showed me what would become the arcade originally, didn't you?
That's it, yeah, because it felt a bit more dark and dingy, and it was a little bit damp, but I thought you could get away with it. We sort of talked about that for a little bit. And it was only when we walked back upstairs to the conference room, which was sort of next door on the top floor, that I said, oh, well, there is actually the room next door. And it was this huge room just filled with junk. And as soon as I walked in through the door, and as soon as I saw Neil come through and his eyes lit up, I thought, yeah, he's going to want this. So it didn't take long to figure out a deal to rent that space. But as Heber, we'd been here since the early 70s in one form or another. And Heber Electronics was set up in 1984 to do design consultancy and electronics manufacturing. And all the way through that, and still to this day, we still design and manufacture every single thing in the UK. So every single electronics design we manufacture for customers are all made here in the UK.
And I mean, I imagine if you're watching Neil's channel, you're a retro computer enthusiast yourself as well then. So this must have been just like a real fun project to get involved with.
Oh, yeah. We've got a huge history with electronics and technology in gaming and all sorts of different things, from pinball to all sorts throughout the whole gaming industry. So we've had a very long history of that. And I grew up with computers, obviously, in the 80s. My first computer was a ZX81, and then I was Commodore all the way with VIC-20s and Commodore 16 and Commodore 128, and then an Amiga. Very, very much involved in all of that. Really got very heavily involved in sort of retro gaming and things in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And really, I've always wanted to do more for the community. So it was actually one of the very first conversations we had as Neil was moving in about designing and doing things for the community. And that turned into the multi-system, which is a product we've sort of designed together. And again, I've got a wonderful team of directors here. So that was a conversation with Neil one week, a proposal to the board the next week, and a sign-off, and away we go. So it didn't take long for actually that to get designed and put into manufacturing. The only thing that really stopped us, and it's still a pain right now, is the global shortage of electronics and components and very long lead times. So that's been a pain, just as much as it is for Neil. Throughout the pandemic, we've had real problems getting hold of electronic components and just keeping manufacturing going.
Yeah, I mean, I love the videos you guys made on that, the Mr. Multi-System, basically turning the Mr. into a console, and, you know, really great innovation, I think. And tell us a bit more about that then, and kind of the current status on it. I mean, you mentioned the part shortage there. I mean, is that getting better, or are you going to be making any revisions on it to make, you know, part acquisitions easier?
Yeah.
What's kind of the future of that?
We've invested in a lot of parts just to make manufacturing easier for this year. So that's sort of something we can at least keep going. We had originally grand plans of making our own custom system, using a whole new design, but really that was just too difficult, and the prices were crazy for FPGAs when we were looking at that. So taking the advantage of using the multi-system, using the Mr. project as a starting point, and that was already got a good community behind it, and an open source technology, we decided to do some investment into that and produce a consoleized form factor, because really I found it quite hard to show people how to set up the Mr. system. It's got lots of plugs and connectors and things on every single edge of the board, and it can be a little bit confusing for people to get set up. So I wanted something that just had ports at the front and ports at the back, and in a nice small case. So yeah, it was really, really nice just to go through that process and get something out. It's a fairly straightforward design. There's nothing hugely revolutionary about it, but it's an early start into an industry that we want to do a lot more in. So since then, we've produced cartridge add-ons for the MT32 Pi and S-Video outputs. We're just about to release a range of controller inputs. So you can use your classic control systems on the Mr. with very low latency, under a millisecond of latency, with all your original control ports and pads and joysticks and things like that. So that's going to be coming out very, very soon. We're just manufacturing a batch of those. And we've got plans to do sort of hopefully lower cost variants and different things in the future as well for the multi-system range of controls.
You know, using FPGA devices like the Mr. as well, there is just something different about using those compared to, say, for example, a Raspberry Pi with an emulator. It just feels more like an actual console and original hardware, doesn't it? You can definitely spot the difference.
Oh, it really does. It's so hard to explain this to someone who's just used PCs or just used Raspberry Pis, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I was using MAME back in, it was 0.32, you know, the very early days, 1997. I was really enjoying using MAME and watching it grow over time. But as soon as hardware capable platforms that were representing the technology sort of on a hardware level came about, not only do you get that sort of almost instant boot, you know, everything turns on and it's there, the core, you can set it up to boot instantly, and you'll be running the game or the platform or the console or the system, you know, pretty quickly. It feels just so much more real, like a real platform, and there's nothing to distract you with things going off in the background, or suddenly turning into a window, or, you know, doing horrible things that Windows or Linux would do over the top of normal emulators and things. So yeah, it really does feel quite different. And that's something you've got to experience, I think, rather than just try and persuade people that it's better. It's very difficult.
Yeah, there's nothing that takes you out of the experience of, you know, playing Sonic the Hedgehog and then your antivirus updates in front of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you just see some random slowdown that you can't really account for and things like that. So yeah, it's very much where we've always wanted to go with the technology. And we've got a very long history of using FPGAs. Back in the early 90s, we used some of the very first anti-fuse single-use FPGAs. So these were one-time programmable, very expensive, and you don't want to get them wrong. But some of our early products into the gaming industry used these for security and rationalization of components, which made our products a lot cheaper and a lot easier into the gaming market.
So, Neil, you've recently introduced the Arcade Archive. Can you tell us about this?
So I guess out of the success of the cave, I carried on having conversations with Richard about the rest of the space in the mill. And it turned out that Heber were very open-minded about continuing this development and seeing who else they could bring into the mill to build on the success we'd had. So I made a video. I put it out on YouTube just explaining here's the rest of the mill. And we had a walk around and showed some of the rooms, including what would become the arcade, which was pretty much just a storage room. And I think it had been for near on a decade, if not longer. Is that right, Richard?
Yeah, it's almost 15 years.
15
just filled with junk.
Sort of junk in there. And there were other spaces. And we just said out there to the community, if there's anyone who wants to come and open a cafe, a pinball museum, a maker space, an arcade, anything like that, get in touch and we'd love to chat with you. And then before long, I had an email from Alex who said, I'm pretty local. I think within about half an hour of the cave. I'm an arcade collector. I've got a YouTube channel and I'd love to have a chat. And that's how it all started. So I had spoken to Alex once before when we discussed possibly doing a retro road trip, which is one of my series. I was going to go and look at his home arcade.
You never got that, did you?
No, sorry, no, Alex. We never made that happen. We can do it next week, mate, if you want.
Instead, he brought his collection to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So Alex came along for a chat, and I don't know, maybe it's a good point for Alex to pick up the story from there.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great to hear a bit about your kind of background,
Our next
Alex.
question was.
Where did your journey start with arcades? What's kind of your background?
I guess it started with eBay and me buying my first Space Invaders machine for about £300 and didn't have the space for it. And that's been the case throughout my hobby. I never had the space for really any of it.
I think that's the case for all of us now.
Yeah. And I joined UKVAC, which is the forum for arcade collectors, and met like-minded collectors, and just got really into the hobby and just thoroughly enjoyed over the last 15 years investigating companies like Nintendo. I tried to get every single Nintendo arcade machine and realised I didn't have the room. So then I concentrated on the ones that only really got released over here. And then I found myself finding games that were never released, like Sky Skipper, which took me on a journey to America where we did the reveal with Billy Mitchell and Walter Day. And that opened up a can of worms in the community, and I'm just amazed at the amount of games that people have in their collection and they just don't have room for. And I just thought it'd be great to open up a museum and get some of these in there, because a lot these games were made for social spaces for people to enjoy, and a lot of these games now are not getting that exposure, and a lot of people just can't get to play these games, and a lot of them have unique controls and interesting monitors and half mirrors. And I just think, when you see people walk into the arcade and you see their faces lit up, it's just, they need to be played and they need to be in a space where people can enjoy them. And I thought a museum would be a great idea to do. But I mean, I've got no experience in this whatsoever. It's a completely new venture for me. I've been a builder for most of my life, so I'm just finding my way like Neil does at the moment. And so far, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Just seeing people's faces when they walk through the door is incredible.
You've obviously got a lot of passion for arcades. I mean, I'm kind of wondering, where did that start then? What were your kind of formative experiences and where did you go as a kid?
Well, I guess I have fond memories of Space Invaders as a child. Me and my best friend used to queue up for ages to play it, and usually play for about 30 seconds, then join the back of the queue again. I mean, it was it was an incredible machine when it landed on the planet, because we'd never seen anything like it before. It literally changed everything. My dad used to take me to arcades down in Littlehampton and used to see the old electromechanical games, but it never really grabbed my attention like Space Invaders did. And I think for me, that's where it all started, just reliving that nostalgia again. And they're fantastic games as well. They've got so much replay value because they've got this high score that you're constantly trying to beat. I just think they make for great competitive gameplay amongst the community or friends, Whereas modern games, they're just storylines or simulations, and once you've played through them, then that's it. You rarely go back to them once you've done them, unless they're absolute classics.
I agree with you there. They're a bit more of a cinematic experience, and how often do you go back, unless it becomes your favourite film?
Yes.
You don't often go back to a film, and I find with modern games, you don't often go back to a modern game as much as you might enjoy it, unless, like you say, it becomes an absolute classic. And I think you hit the nail on the head, a few moments ago. You were saying about the community feel of it as well. Having it, as part of the museum, I think is an absolutely fantastic idea there. So it must be, like you say, you're really enjoying it. It must be a really warm feeling to see it be, becoming a success as well.
Yeah, and just going in there and turning them all on and just seeing all the artwork. I mean, the artwork on some of these cabinets is just incredible. The lengths they went to get the kids to play these games back then was just amazing. And that's another side of the hobby that I love, as well as the community and playing and restoring them, because that's what we're doing at the museum. We're trying to restore a lot of the games and keep them going. That's been the hardest task, keeping them going, but that's the nature of it, unfortunately.
So that leads nicely into our next question. So you have a YouTube channel as well. What can you tell us about that, and what do you cover?
Been 10 years this year, funny enough. Wow. My first videos are of me collecting the early Nintendo cocktails and trying to restore them. And, that's all I've been doing, sort of arcade videos, game room tours, pickup videos, that kind of thing, But now I've got the museum. It's I've got an endless amount of content to create. I don't know where to start half the time when I go in there. So what should I do this week? There's just so much.
Well,
it's great.
We were talking about pickups and donations earlier. Just last week, Alex turned up with a box of 50 arcade PCBs that he's picked up.
Oh, wow.
So, that's years worth of content and repairs and gameplay in there.
How are you kind of sourcing these machines then, and how big is your collection so far?
Well, because I know the community, I've organised the UK VAT meets over the years, so everyone knows me for being in the hobby and organising these events. And I know pretty much most of the collectors in the community. I know what they've got. I know where stuff's hidden, and I've just reached out to them, and some of them reached out to me and just said, look, I don't have the space. Do you want to have it on loan for a while? So we've got a lot of machines on loan from the community, which is really nice, as well as my collection is in there, and I'm constantly looking for more games, seeing what's out there. I'm currently sort of delving into sort of the British history, which hasn't really been told that much of the arcade scene. You've got this mythical vision most people have of arcades like in Tron or in Stranger Things, but actually the arcades in Britain were a little bit different. So I'm trying to explore that avenue and just try and tell the story of a few of the British companies that were around in the UK and actually doing pretty well.
I find that angle really interesting as well. I mean, I guess it's more, obviously people are coming along to play the games and have fun, but also, do you want to kind of teach them the story behind them as well? Is that kind of an aim of the
definitely. Since I welcome people into the museum, I try and give them a little bit of a history line, a timeline of the arcade games. Some are interested, some aren't. Some just want to come down and play the games, which is absolutely fine, but it's always great when I get involved with someone is interested and I can tell the story and go into a little bit more depth and get a little bit more geeky about it all. But yeah, it's all there. We've got, in fact, the games that I've picked specifically for the museum have been either pioneering games or done games for a first, because you want that in a historical timeline when you're representing a museum. So we've got Atari's Pong in there. We've also got Alka's Ping Pong, which is the first British-made video game. We've got Sega's Gunfight, which is an electromechanical game, which gave inspiration for Taito's Western Gun and Midway's Gunfight. And then we've got, Blue Shark, a game that Midway thought was going to be more successful than Space Invaders and wasn't because it was time-based. We've got that in there. Everyone thinks it was the game that was in Jaws, but it wasn't. That was Killer Shark. We've got Seawolf, another fantastic, an extremely rare arcade game. I remember that as a kid because it's a little bit like Battlezone, where it had a little step up where kids could stand on and hang off the periscope. And I haven't seen one of them since I was a kid, so I was absolutely delighted to have that for the museum. That's on loan. But yeah, honestly, we've got an amazing games. We've got Nintendo Sky Skipper, unreleased game. The only place in the world where you can go and get a world record on the Sky Skipper is the Arcade Archive. We've got Stern's Rescue, a prototype game by Chris Oberth, which is a really nice twin-stick shooter. And then I've managed to pick up an Asteroid Deluxe that has never had any arcade use. It's been in the home its whole life, and it was previously owned by the manager of Led Zeppelin, Peter Grant, who bought it for a birthday present. Can you believe that? For his son, Warren Grant. And it's absolutely immaculate. And most people love that machine. When they walk in, they always say it's their favourite, and I have to agree, because it's got this half mirror. It's called the Pepper's Ghost effect, where it reflects the image, the raster screen, onto a back glass, and it just looks amazing. It really does.
Alex, I noticed you didn't mention track and field. Where's that?
Oh, track and field. Well, so that was in my arcade, in my personal arcade, and I mentioned it to Neil and said, "You've got to have that in the museum. You've got to bring it down." And since I brought it down, it has never had so much play. I mean, it's just incredible. That is our go-to game, Neil, isn't it? Whenever.
It is, but yeah, a bit more practice, Alex, and you might get that high score. Honestly,
fight talk.
What Alex was saying about high scores, he's turned me into a monster. I was never that worried about high scores, but since the arcade's been there, I'm just constantly trying to beat scores now. And we've set up a scoreboard on a screen there now, which is Neil versus Alex. So we're keeping a tally of our scores on different games. Yeah, it's getting very competitive.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so.
No, actually, Neil, it would be quite interesting to hear a bit about your kind of arcade memories as well. I mean, what was your kind of history of arcades, and where did you go as a kid, and what games kind of drew you in?
Oh, very much seafront arcade. So I grew up in Dorset near Weymouth. So Weymouth Seafront was where I did most of my arcade gaming. There were three or four big arcades along the seafront there. And a lot of the very old games stuck around, because I'm a little bit younger than Alex, but a lot of the old classics still stuck around at the back because they were big arcades and they were still taking 10p or 20p. And then as well as the newer ones that came along, probably stopped going at around about the time we were seeing things like probably as late as Sega Rally 2 and F355 Challenge. So that would have been at Sega World in Bournemouth, which was also in my neighbourhood. That, and then Butlin's Minehead. I have great memories of playing things like Gauntlet and Outrun and Dragon's Lair at Butlin's Minehead. So, but mostly seafront arcades. So to see these things reappear, and then to learn a lot about the older ones, because Alex often talks about the golden era of arcades, which ends at about, would you say 1984, around about there, Alex?
Yeah, I would say, in America it did.
Okay.
It's America's slightly different. They had a sort of bit of a crash over there, whereas I think our arcade scene fared a little bit better because we had Jammer, didn't we, which was big over here, and you had big companies like Electrical and importing a lot of bootleg. Well, they didn't import bootlegs, but that was quite a big thing, bootlegs, and getting a lot of games directly from Japan, which Electrical was very good at. And America had more the dedicated cabinets, which kind of died out 84. But I think the British arcade scene for me sort of finished around sort of Street Fighter, really. I don't know, that kind of era.
Street Fighter 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, around 92. Yeah, so I have memories of the big successful arcades from the golden era that stuck around, but there are so many more that were pioneers that perhaps weren't successful but introduced new themes and new genres that I'm getting to enjoy through the arcade archive. So, yeah, I'm learning every day from Alex. It's great.
I love the fact that you mentioned Butlins as well, because we used to go to Butlins and Pontins, every now and then when I was getting Haven Holidays, we used to go to. They all had great arcades as well. I mean, I remember playing the original Mortal Kombat for the first time at Butlins.
Yeah, Butlins had them everywhere, like even just queuing to go into the water slides, the water park part Butlins. There was an Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in the queue. They were just everywhere, yeah. Because
your mum and dad would be watching some like crap cabaret, and then the kids would just all night be in the arcade, run back to your dad every half an hour for another quid. And then,
Isn't it funny how times have changed? Here's a quid, go away for an hour. So speaking of kids and hanging off periscopes and stuff like that, what are some of the biggest challenges you guys have about maintaining, the arcade machines and stuff like that? Is there a big fear of when you kind of open it up to the children and just kind of to the general public, like some of the damage they can do? Because you've got some really rare systems in there,
Yeah, first job is to make them safe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them haven't been particularly wired very well over the years, or they've been hacked in one way or another. That was always a bit of a surprise when they turned up after you spent so much money on them. But yeah, I guess sourcing parts. But I mean, with this community, the retro community, people are making everything now, from sort of high score kits, save kits, multi-game kits that you can add on that play other games from that original hardware. There's the Mister, there's the Pi, you can run in certain games. I mean, for the museum, as long as we've got the original board in there, because I mean, some of these boards have custom chips, and once those go, then that's it. The board's dead. You can't repair it, so you have to have some sort of backup. But I think as long as we're showing the original board set, we're fine. But the aim is to have all of it on original hardware. That's what I would like. But again, it's finding the parts and the PCBs, which is difficult. Hence why I picked up that huge haul of PCBs up the other week.
I love it when a new machine arrives. I know Alex is like me. We're quite impatient. We really want to turn it on and test it out, but I just have to keep saying, let Richard look at it first. Let Richard look at it first. Don't plug it in, because we can spot some of the more common problems, but Richard is the man when it comes to our repairs. So he really gets down and dirty with the difficult stuff.
Are there any common things that you look for, Richard? Any things that you generally find go first on these old cabinets, or anything that you need to check first?
In the bottom.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
The general condition is usually a little bit dusty and a bit scratched up, because a lot of these machines have obviously been sat in someone's collection or in a garage or warehouse for a long time. Most machines don't get turned on anywhere near as much as we're turning them on in the arcade every day. So we tend to always look for the obvious things like frayed leads. It's amazing how many times a mains cable will get rubbed and just generally crushed as it gets moved around from place to place. So there's always frayed leads, there's always exposed wires, and you just have to replace those. We did have outrun with the death plug on the end, which was terrible. It was really virtually just hanging off with bits of plastic and tape. So we had to change those. They're the obvious ones. When you get inside, then it's really just making sure that the power supply is not going to just burst in flames. And that can actually happen. They're very old power supplies. They can be effectively shorted out with capacitors and various things like that. So, and some people tend to forget that they run up at 110 volts, a lot of these machines. So Alex had one the other day that he collected for a collector, and the collector forgot it was 110 volts and managed to blow it up by putting 240 volts into it. So you've got to be a little bit careful there. And then generally just making sure that there's nothing too corroded on the wiring looms up to the machines. A lot of the time, if there's one thing we've learned over these last sort of 6 months or so, is you can fix probably 80% of most original power on problems by cleaning everything, reseating all the chips, giving everything a really, really good clean, a bit like Neil does with his trash to treasure range. You don't have to, it's not always something that's going to have become faulty. It's sometimes just a connection problem and sometimes just a wiring problem. Plastics become very brittle as well. So sometimes things do break, especially in transit. We had a Juno First machine come in the other day, and someone put their finger right through the button on one of the start buttons, but that wasn't their fault. That was just the fact that it was just brittle plastic. That machine was quite interesting. Alex said to me, it's been going around in the community for probably 10 or 15 years. Lots of people had it. And Alex said to me that it was really nice that it was coming back here for retirement. But actually what it didn't know is going to be turned on every single day and thrashed to death. So
it's working harder than ever now.
It's got a wonderful retirement, but we got to fix it and keep it going. But again, these machines are wonderful. It's a very, very much a whole sensory experience, the arcade. There's nothing really that, a bit like your question earlier about emulators and running things on a PC or even on the multi-system or something like that. In the arcade, it's a whole nother level of experience. You experience the sight, the smell of the old wood, the monitor, the sort of the vapors that come off of these machines. And the whole experience of the deep sound effects, there's nothing quite like walking up to a gauntlet where it's just playing a track tune and the amount of depth and bass that goes on with that. So the thing I love to watch is when people walk into the arcade and they actually feel it, because I've said to Neil, and we've had conversations about this, that I think some of the most visual memories I've got of growing up with arcades is remembering where all the machines were in a location. So I used to go to Western Supermare a lot, and I can still vividly remember where all these machines were, where they were sited, what was playing. And I can't say that about most other types of vintage technology, but for some reason, they had a massive, massive effect on me, and I can still remember that. And I do hope that in years to come, someone will remember Alex's wonderful arcade with all of these machines and how they were set up, and all of the history behind them. So it's difficult to get them up and running, but once they get up and running, once you get them all safe and a few things tuned in, they're actually pretty reliable, because that's what they were designed. That's exactly what they were designed for. They were designed to run 24/7.
Yes, it's interesting you mentioned the kind of sensory aspect of it as well. Because, I mean, I watched the video when you guys were putting it together, and kind of some of the things you did there to kind of give that authentic arcade experience. There's one thing, though, that I think they might need to make maybe an aerosol can of the 80s or 90s arcade
scented
smell.
candle.
Yeah, which was a peculiar mixture of generally cigarettes, beer,
I think we can
bit of
leave some
sweat,
things
maybe.
in the past, can't we?
Yeah. Maybe the sticky carpets and everything else. We just leave that. Yeah.
But what additions did you go for to kind of give it the authentic experience?
Well,
and
some
any
of-
things you kind of did?
Some of the machines haven't been turned on for such a long time. That Centauri, which is a British-made company, bootleg of Mooncrester, it's got a specific smell. It just it's straight back to, I don't know, any pub in the late 70s, early 80s. It's just got, I don't know what it is, but it's got its own smell.
There's definitely a few chip shop machines, definitely. Without a doubt, you can just tell that they've been in a chip shop for 20 years. So there's definitely a few of those. Yeah. And it all combines to just a wonderful sort of atmosphere. Yeah, that's the sights, the sounds, the attract. We've got sort of low-level lighting, but just enough. Each one of the cabinets has got an information terminal that gently lit up just above it. Gives you some key facts about the history, who made the games, how it was impactful. As Alex said, very much trying to preserve the history of these machines and teach people a little bit about them. But of course, people just want to play as well, so that's fine.
So in terms of like maintaining it and stuff, maintaining the arcade machines and stuff, do you find there's any like modern parts that you keep the machines going? You used to keep the machines going, like FPGAs or anything like that?
Yeah, not so much FPGAs, but certainly power supplies are a real tricky one. So a lot of them used to use the really big transformer-based power supplies, and some of these are huge. They weigh a ton. Literally they're 25 kilograms. Some of these things.
Oh wow!
They're often referred to as suitcase power supplies. So they drop in the bottom of the machine, come in and regulate down. Have huge capacitors, the size of your fist or even bigger, just to smooth everything and try and get things down to a sensible rating. So. The same sort of thing nowadays could be a small switch mode power supply that just literally plugs in the wall, or a USB-C type of power supply. You can get the same current out of it. So it is really quite ridiculous that these old power supplies are still carrying on. And a lot of them do work, but more and more of them start to break down. The windings and the resin inside the power supply break down. You can start smelling when they start to break down. We had Tapper running for about 3.5 minutes the other day, and within that you could hear it starting to crackle and break down. So that was one for an immediate turn off and replacement of that power supply. Now with that, you've got a few options really. You can go all modern, or you can go a hybrid of sort of modern and something that's going to get you a little bit closer to the original specs of what the electronics are expecting, because a lot of these machines don't actually like modern day switch mode power supplies with their very fast rise times and immediate on and immediate off. They actually prefer a sort of a gentler rise, a big capacitor on the output that turns them off very slowly and then reset signals that can relax and then collapse properly. So that's a really big challenge. It's probably one of the biggest things we've got to face, other than the CRT problem, which is an even bigger problem long term. But yeah, the power supplies on the machines are probably the hardest thing to to make to keep going, and then to decide how to replace them. But I think we've got a real healthy sort of attitude towards preservation and doing things that would be authentic to how you would probably have done them back in the day. We've got a lot of machines where people have ripped things out and put in replacement, but they're of that period time. So you can't actually complain that they're modified or different, because that was what was available in the 90s, to replace certain parts. I think it's different when someone comes along and just whips the monitor out, puts an LCD screen in, that's a no-no for us. But when you're trying to, not really change form, fit and function, you're really just trying to keep things stable and safe and reliable. That's something that we've made a few compromises on, but we try our very best to do things as authentically as possible.
And do you have to do like daily checks on them all? Like, I mean, I imagine the last thing you want is like some kid to run over going, outrun's crackling, I think it's going to blow up.
Yeah, we haven't had too many disasters, but yeah, just generally, you can see pretty much straight away. You'll either get a sound problem or a channel goes. That's quite a common thing, actually, because a lot of the sound was developed on multiple boards. Sometimes there were speech samples that were then mixed in with analog samples that were generated by special chips or even custom chips or even just standard analog logic. So Space Invaders is one for that. I think correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, I think there's multiple different sound effects that can all be tinily tweaked, all in different ways. So someone who's experienced.
I need to turn the thump up, because that's a bit
it. Yeah. So people have experienced Space Invaders in multiple different ways, because it depends on how the operator set it up and how all of those different sound effects were tweaked to get them just how they wanted it. So that's an interesting experience. It's something you can't really simulate, and your machine might be slightly different to someone else's just because it's an analog based system. So yeah, replacing some of those parts. You'll see those go down. We've got a Sinistar at the moment without any sound effects, which is a bit disappointing because it has some great sound effects. So if we're going to get that one up and running in the next week or so.
Yeah, it's also interesting what people don't see, which is what's in the storeroom, including an arcade Alex has got, or two arcades Alex has got, which are based on 16mm film. So there's some really incredible machines waiting for Richard's skills. I think we're just about past the initial. It's a bit like when I opened the cave. When I first opened the cave, a lot of my TVs started popping because they just hadn't been used a lot for so much time. So over time, I got them serviced, and it was a bit of a case of survival of the fittest. They stayed, and they've been super reliable ever since. And we're kind of getting to that point with the arcades. We've turned them on. The initial problems have started to iron out, and things have got a lot more reliable. And now we can slowly start to turn our attention to the things that are in the storeroom, like that. What's the 16mm film one called, Alex, that you've got
That's there? Nintendo's Battle Shark / Sky Shark.
Yeah, so we can possibly turn our attention to those. And just like me, Alex, with his YouTube channel, can do some wonderful series on restoring these, as he is doing at the moment with Atari Sprint 2, which I didn't know was the first racing game with a CPU. Is that right, Alex?
That's right, yeah.
And went on to become Super Sprint, Championship Sprint, and all of that series. So I can't wait to see that up and running. But the work Alex has done so far on it is already incredible. And Richard's been working behind the scenes on the PCBs, and that's all going to come together to make a really great video series.
That's fantastic. And I love the fact that you're preserving this important part of history as well. Because, I mean, you guys have probably seen all these stories. We were talking about that the original 3-screen Ridge Racer cabinet that was left to rot, and we saw that Sega R360 that was found in a field.
Yeah,
and stuff like that is heartbreaking. So I think it is, preserving these. It's a dwindling thing, isn't it? These cabinets are not getting made anymore, so it's important that we keep them up and running so people can experience them.
Yeah, I think if you're going to do this right, and people want that nostalgia and that experience, you've got to keep the original stuff going as long as you can. Otherwise, there's lots of other options like the one-up cabs that people have in their homes with the LCD screens and stuff, which is fine, but we're trying to recreate and try and keep these classics going. And for me, that's really, really special. You just can't beat it.
Especially with some of those unique controls, the yoke in Star Wars, you can't even recreate that. There's nothing you can get to clamp to your desk or anything that really creates something on that experience. And just playing Outrun, it's one of Neil's favorite games, and just playing that on a real cab with the stick shift and everything. Everything just feels natural, feels good. It's just so different to trying to emulate that or trying to run it elsewhere. So a lot of it is about nostalgia, but some of it is about that sort of history of keeping these machines going, because there's nothing else like them and there's nothing else coming along that's like them. And when you have a whole load of them in one place, that sort of overall emotion and feeling you get, not just nostalgia, it's a complete unique experience. We see people that go into the arcade and they come out almost for a breather. They go up to the cave and just see them sort of like physically having a calming down session. It's quite amazing.
So, Richard, I hear you're starting your own retro repair side business too. What's the story there?
Oh, well, yeah. Okay. So this is, it's a bit of an exclusive because we've not really talked about this to anyone else yet. So you've got a bit of a first dibs on our ideas here. For a long time, we've done repairs of technology. We pride ourselves in trying to keep our own technology going. And we've got a lot of 68,000 based technology out there, very similar to sort of the Amiga and Dreamcast type technologies that we've kept going over the years. But we've tried to find a way to open that up to not just the retro community, but sort of classic vintage technology, and how we could actually look at doing more repairs and restorations and also upgrades that people might want, not just cap kits, but maybe upgrades and things for modern parts in vintage systems. So we're starting off very slow. We've basically built ourselves a couple of labs. And Neil's building a lab actually in the cave as well. I'm not sure whether he's ready to talk about that yet, but that's something something that's going to be part of this idea. And what we're doing now is we're sort of figuring out what the community would want, as in repairs and upgrades and service, then what people would be happy to, put forward with their machines. I mean, it's always a difficult thing asking people to ship machines to you. So that might start off as if you're visiting, you can bring a machine along and we'll try and do a cap kit for you or do some upgrades or fix it, diagnose it. Maybe we'll get, to the point of being able to offer that a little bit wider afield. But yeah, what we're trying to do really is to get something set up now and also invite people that want to take part in that. So any engineers that would like to be involved in working on machines, working on restoration of classic computers, please get in touch. This is sort of an open invitation. We're taking, trying to get people who want to be part of that, and companies, smaller companies that maybe have been doing it themselves, one-man bands that want to just grow or have a bit more of a structured company around them to make everything, all the administration a bit easier, so they can just get on doing the things that they want to do. And generally, that's our philosophy in all of this. In the whole collective that we're doing here is bring in like-minded individuals to do things that make their life easier, and have a company structure around it that does all of the administration, whether that's sales, service support, emails, returns, all that sort of thing that necessarily you don't want to do if you're just an engineer or you're just someone who wants to get involved in fixing things or designing things or manufacturing things. So yeah, that's really part of the bigger, wider plan, really.
Yeah, if you're a retired TV service engineer and retirement isn't all it cracked up to be, you want that excitement back in your life, give us a call.
There's a home for you in the cave.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly. But no, I mean, Richard just touched on something there, which is how started, it's still early days, but we've started to formalize all of this. So I'm still the cave doing my YouTube thing, and now it's a museum. Alex is the Arcade Archive doing his YouTube thing, and that's a museum. Richard's now setting up this repair business, of which we don't have a name yet. We've got sort of a short list of names. So if you've got any suggestions for names, we'd love to hear them from your listeners. So this is all kind of becoming formalized under this umbrella name of the Retro Collective, and retrocollective.co.uk is our website where you can read about it, you can book visits and all of that stuff. So this repair business will become a part of the collective, and as will anyone else who steps forward with an idea to open something else in the mill. So we're all coming together under this name now.
I think that's an amazing idea. I can already hear Joe loading the back of his car with about 50 consoles to drive down and get repaired.
I've got 100 Game Gears, guys.
Well, I mean, the cave is definitely worth a visit. I mean, it's in the heart of the Cotswolds as well, so you can combine it with a nice little getaway. Mm-hmm. Any events coming up then? I know you've got friends from the Ted Dabney experience down there this weekend.
Yeah, that's this Sunday. So the guys from the Ted Dabney podcast are coming for a special day, which, Alex, you're hosting, aren't you?
Yes.
part arcade, part cave. This is the nice thing. When we do these events, you can enjoy both spaces. Sometimes we have a buffet up in the cave, and then we go down for some intense arcade gaming. Exactly what's on the agenda for Ted Dabney, I don't know. Alex, you can maybe fill us in.
Well, the guys, if you've followed the podcast, they've interviewed some amazing faces from the arcade scene. It was more America, but he has done a great interview with Alan Meads recently, who wrote that book Arcade Britannia. So hopefully they'll be touching on a few of those previous podcasts that they've recorded over the years, and pick out a few of their favourites, because there's plenty of questions I'd love to ask them about them.
Yeah, and Paul Drury, who hosts that podcast, I mean, he's just got the most amazing energy when he's presenting as well. I think he's the only person I've seen on stage in front of about 1,000 people who didn't need a microphone, and everyone in the room could still hear him. So yeah, that's happening this weekend. Obviously, I'll link up your website as well if people want to visit over spring and summer as well. Gents, it's been incredible chatting to you, and the passion and the love that you put into the cave so far, and long may it continue. And we definitely need to do a Retro Hour road trip down there, Joe.
Yes, please. And if you ever want to record the Retro Hour in front of an audience down at the cave or anything like
scary.
that, there's an open invite. You're always welcome.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
We do need to do that. It's just terrifying.
Thank you so much, guys, and best of luck with it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.